it's important that as a community, you're very clear on what your anchors are. People will have different ideologies. They will have different perspectives of the world. They will come from different cultures and backgrounds. So creating common language around the anchor of your mission, of your vision, and the focus on that, that's extremely important. Everything else needs to be understood, which is secondary. Your community needs to have clarity on what those specific anchors are.
Hi everyone, it's Alimi here, and you're watching another exciting episode of NEWFORUM. NEWFORUM is a community podcast inviting purpose-driven visionaries, creators, developers, and investors to spark accessible conversations on the topics of crypto, the metaverse, NFT, and everything Web3. And today I'm super honored to have Rafa on this episode. Rafa is from Puerto Rico, and he co-founded Obras del País, a nonprofit organization focused on the preservation of his cultural heritage and the integration of the artisan community into the digital world where it can be valued internationally. Rafa explores Web3 collectives combining organization design theory with digital-first community practice. He is currently working full-time building the Mirror DAO as part of Mirror.xyz. He's also a contributor at other DAOs such as Cabin and serves as an advisor for a few selected organizations. Most often, Rafa works as a community architect, researching and implementing digital-first operational models. I cannot wait to begin the conversation with Rafa about his experience building the Mirror DAO and contributing to other DAOs such as Cabin. I am also curious to hear his perspective on the question that is on most people's minds: do DAOs have a future? We will also discuss the essential ingredients for starting and building successful digital communities and why community building matters in Web3. Hey, Rafa, thanks for joining me.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you. I'm very excited to dive in.
So Rafa, you wrote that the focus of your work stems from a nagging question that you have not been able to answer for almost 15 years now. And this question is, how do organizations work? You wrote that this question was first uncovered while you were counting screws at your uncle's hardware store. I want to know the story, and how has this led you to where you are today?
It's really interesting to think back to how an interesting summer at my uncle's hardware store really shaped my curiosity. During that summer, I must have been 18 at the time. I was working for my uncle, and the job that I was taking over was counting screws. So I was working in their inventory and taking this big bag of screws. Well, it was more like a barrel, and putting them in little bags of 100 at a time. And a question kind of came up, like, how does this work? Like, if I'm working full time for my uncle here, like counting screws, how does a business survive? How does the organization work? Where do the screws go? What is like kind of the value chain of the organization of that business go? Where does it start? Where does it end? How do people participate? And so based on that question, I started getting more curious and digging into it. And I took on a variety of different operational and analyst and strategy roles to better understand that question. How do humans coordinate? How do organizations work? How do businesses provide value in our economy?
Wow, it's incredible that counting screws led you to this amazing path. And you also work as a community architect with a passion for understanding the next generation when it comes to leadership skills, operational management, and DAO tooling. Why is this crucial for you? I mean, I'm pretty sure it's connected to this story you just shared with us, but I'd like to hear where you're at currently.
Well, I think that there's a lot of strange things happening in the world, and it's something that's relatively new, but in the history of humanity is this concept of the internet, of this digital world. And it's really reshaping the way that we work together. One of the things I'm very curious about is that although we have all this new technology that gives us basically an infinite amount of knowledge, there's just boundless amount of information that we can consume. We have algorithmic feeds that provide us engaging content, maybe not the best content, but definitely engaging content. We work all day carrying around a little black crystal that serves as an oracle that tells us the weather, not just today, but tomorrow, that tells us what the overall market is. We have incredibly sophisticated technology nowadays that provides virtually instant communication with hundreds and thousands of people around the world. And I think it would be naive to think that the same way that we've done work in the past is going to be the same way that we do work in the future, that we craft, the way that we produce value for ourselves and for others. And so when I look forward in time, so 10, 20 years, and we go from, the iPhone launched in 2007, it's barely been 15 years of adoption for the world that has really changed the world. We have Amazon Prime and 2-day delivery and for a large portion of the world. Then we need to ask ourselves, how does that change the things that we do? And how does that change the type of leadership style that we have? How does that change the communities that we're kind of building? And I like this term, kind of like thinking about it as post-digital. So, currently we still have this like divide of like what's in the physical world versus what's in the digital world, but it's actually not that different. It's like, it's the same thing. And there's not really a binary. There's kind of like shades of gray. Like if you're walking down and using Google Maps, are you in the digital world or are you in the physical world? Well, you're in both. And when you say, okay, how does navigation work when you have this additional information, then it changes the way that you do things. One very trivial example is the fact that we send pins to each other, right? We don't send directions to each other anymore. Maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you would have to talk to someone on the phone, tell them where you were going. You would have to maybe explain how to get to that place, or they would have to ask their network of people how to get to this new place if they didn't know it. We no longer do that. So our planning phase for participation is quite instantaneous. I can text a group of people in the morning, as I did yesterday, and said, hey, does anybody want to grab dinner tonight? We'll pick a place and we'll go. So our cost of coordination just like decreased significantly. Whereas before I would have had to maybe call each person individually, or go walk over to their houses. And I think that's quite magical. But with magic means that the roles change, and like the work that we do and the styles with which we engage definitely change.
Yeah, I definitely agree that things have changed, and I remember those times when I would write letters, and now you're just mostly texting. I don't remember the last time I actually used my pen. I'm also curious to know your thoughts, this idea of digitization or digitizing everything. Does it have the potential to win over the physical without any physical connection? And I mean, we're physical beings, and sometimes when we have conversations with people who are like hardcore innovating in the metaverse, I sense that everything is supposedly going to be happening in this metaverse world, right? And I think this is why I'm kind of a bit concerned, I'd say, because this example that you gave, I think makes sense, right? Like you using the GPS to navigate where you're going or dropping pins. It is some sort of a collaboration between the digital and the physical. But is it possible to do it without that, just living in this this digital world?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't particularly know how it's going to turn out. We already spend 12 hours on screens, 14 hours, 16 hours a day on screens. If you're not on your phone, you're on your computer. If you're not on your computer, you're on your television. So there's a large portion of time that we're already spending like inside this digital world. And yet, the physical world persists. And I think when push comes to shove, it's either going to be a collaboration, but also potentially an expansion. I personally believe that as digital tools become more ingrained into the work that we do, even more so than they are today, it serves as an extension of the experiences that we have, not a replacement for them. I think the replacement piece for a sub-portion of the population, that might be true, but that escapism already existed when books occurred and people who lived their entire lives just like reading and avoiding the real world, or being in a video game for their entire life with like essentially the equivalent of blinders on. I think, yes, for a subset of the population that might be true, but I think for the majority of people, what they're looking for is an integration extension of the work. Now, there are many modern day philosophers and journalists and researchers that warn against this process of digitization, and they call it like taking these like broad buckets and atomizing all of them into like discrete units, countable units, making things that weren't countable. And I think that's really interesting, because I think where we find meaning is we actually find meaning in the ambiguity in the stories that we tell, in this concept of lore, of understanding how the world works from our perspective. And when everything is quote unquote explainable, I think a lot of the magic kind of like is taken away from that. But that doesn't mean that the magic disappears if you actually intentionally embed an experience into the process. So sure, we can go back to the example of maps. It can, going to a place and knowing the address immediately can take away from the adventure, which was to discover a new place. But also we adapt to it. And if we want to embed meaning into the experience, we can also intentionally drive that forward. I think when we talk about digitization, the tools expand, complement the experiences that we have, but hopefully, I think, give us space for imagination so we can create newer type of experiences without maybe so much of the administrative burden that we had before. I think it'll create more space and richer, meaningful experiences.
Yes, I totally agree with that. This idea of it enhancing human experience is what I'm looking forward to even more. I remember, growing up in Ghana, it was really, really difficult to kind of find a place you were going to. But the fun part was you got to meet new people, you got to make friends along the way. So yeah, we're gaining, but I feel like we're also perhaps losing these little details. I know that you are building the Mirror DAO, and I'd love to hear how this is going and what's the experience been like.
Yeah. So one last comment on the last question. I think that a very good example is like, I would love for my taxes to just get sorted, right?
Yes.
And I would love for the digital experience for me to not experience the process of, filling out paperwork, right? And just getting that done. I would much prefer if all of that was like automated and I didn't have to think about it, so that I could spend that time in like quality time, like you said, connecting with new people and new communities. Now, going back to this concept of community building, as we have more automation, we have now AI that can create beautiful pictures. I think it's incumbent on us as designers and as community participants to actually reclaim that time back, to create meaning for ourselves and for others. And that's what I would like to see. So when we talk about Mirror and we talk about other Web3 organizations, what I want to make sure is to create these spaces. I think sometimes we confuse the role of like community building as it's not just event planning, right? I think the real magic in community building is in the design and the development of spaces of connection. And so at Mirror and with the other DAOs that I participate in, I want to be able to invest and nurture in creating these spaces, so that people can create experiences and stories, and not necessarily, create as the School of Social Design and Joe and Ellie mentions, these tubes or funnels where people feel like pushed through a specific environment for a specific metric or objective or KPI or OKR. And so on a day-to-day basis, that's a question that I focus on, which is how can I identify the people who I want to invite into the space, and how can I design that space so that it is inviting to those people. And those people can come in, create experiences together, and find additional meaning, be able to express their values, and contribute to the ecosystem, to the craft, right? Find inspiration, find connection, find mutual support. And, you know, at the end of the day, just be able to have an environment that produces belonging for them. And that has a lot to do with technology. It's like decorating a house or building a temple. These are intentionally designed places, but, you know, my job as a digital community manager is be able to create effective spaces and new types of spaces online.
And I think that's the beauty of DAOs, right? You're probably working with a diverse group of people, right? And I'm just curious to know what makes a good DAO leader, and how can a community leader navigate working with all these people, beautiful cultures, and everybody having their own thoughts and ideas. How do you manage it, and what advice will you give to other DAO leaders or managers?
Diversity is extremely crucial. You can't create a healthy community without having a diversity of participation. And I mean diversity in all the senses of the world, because really it's the richness of the stories that produce these like new experiences. One very, very simple example is, and something often people forget when we even talk about diversity, is different time zones. So I love to give this example. Okay, how do you create a community when you want to invite people from different time zones to be able to participate? And this again goes back to designing the type of space that actually invites people from different time zones to participate. It has a lot to do with like the technology rails that you kind of implement. So there's this aspect. So what does this look like? It means, for example, that if you're doing live events, that those live events are either recorded or rotate, right? So that you have an inclusive participation process. But even before that, I think there's a big part of community design, which is understanding both your current participation and intentional participation that you want to have in the future. So if I want to be able to have people from different time zones, I need to make sure that, for example, my team, my own team, can cover different time zones. So the community participants, you have this, I think it's called reflexive behavior, where by inviting people, intentionally working to recruit your community from the pools of population that you want to participate, actually continues to provide momentum to that flywheel. So you have the technology aspect, which is, for example, recording, asynchronous communication, encouraging people to communicate at length, clearly, and have inclusive participation in the conversation, holding space for people to be able to speak when they're not available. You know, if they're in different time zones, then you definitely don't want to run a governance process in 12 hours, right? Minimum, you want to make sure that you have 2 to 3 days to be able to participate, so that you have inclusivity across all time zones, and people who are maybe in the same time zone, but we're busy like within specific time gaps. So you have that technology piece and the event planning piece, but then you have the community invitation piece, which is you actually have to work at this. It's not enough to have an open door policy. I think people sometimes think that, oh, if I just have an open door and anybody can join, everyone will join. And that's actually not true. You have to do intentional recruitment and outreach to the communities that you want to have participate. And that takes a level of awareness of do you actually reach out to? Who are the people that can provide that momentum? But also in awareness of where your community actually lives today. As an example, if you're doing a community of writers or a community of communities, then you have to ask yourself, where are they today? How can I join their spaces and create bridges from those spaces into the space that you're trying to develop over time? So focus on the infrastructure and technology to be inclusive. Don't stop at an open door policy. Like, you have to have intentional outreach. And the third is, when you do have people from diverse backgrounds, it's important that as a community, you're very clear on what your anchors are. People will have different ideologies. They will have different perspectives of the world. They will come from different cultures and backgrounds. So creating common language around the anchor of your mission, of your vision, and the focus on that, that's extremely important. Everything else needs to be understood, which is secondary. Your community needs to have clarity on what those specific anchors are. So if we have a writing community and we talk about, what's important in our writing community, well, we talk about getting better at writing, getting better at distribution, being more in tune with your readership. These should be non-controversial conversations for your community. If they are controversial, they indicate that there's a misalignment between the participants of the community in terms of what they might be expecting to do and what's actually happening. And so it's up to you to help the community navigate that tension and find alignment again. And that's a continuous process. It's not something you do once. It's constantly addressing these tensions and constantly bringing people back together to these common principles and common anchor of beliefs that really drive the community forward.
Very insightful. I was just thinking that I recently started having these community-led workshops where a person just comes and shares their skills, like Web3 skills, how to build something in Web3, or explains the tools. And I'm like, this is to help you. Why aren't you showing up? And I guess considering the time zones and little details really make a difference, So this is like an incredible point that you made. I also want to know, what are you mostly excited about when it comes to digital communities?
I'm really excited about crypto and blockchain. And the reason for that is it brings physicality into a digital realm. So what I mean by that is, so let's say you're designing a house or a gathering space in the real world, and you need to, if you want to be inviting to a wide range of people, you do have to think about the design, what types of chairs that you get, what type of lighting you put in place. How do you put the tables? Are you sitting on the floor? Do you have carpets? Like, what type of snacks are you putting out? What type of agenda and conversations are you doing? Do you have pamphlets? If you have a bookshelf, what books are you going to include in that library that the community will engage with? How are you going to provide a pathway for the community to engage in the shape of the space? So not just what you do, but how the community engages. So what I'm excited about this new digital environment is that all these new items that we have, so NFTs, which are representative like digital assets, these are new things that we can decorate our spaces with and use as infrastructure. Smart contracts are ways that there are new ways that people can interact with each other and have different types of conversations. They're an expression of values. There are ways to manage a bank account, ways to do administration, ways to manage bureaucracy, ways to cooperate. And previous to this, so if we think about pre-blockchain world, yes, we had some toolkits available, but they weren't easily accessible. A community to be able to get together and open a bank account together is actually a fairly hard thing to do. You'd have to first create a legal entity. You'd have to first do this. You'd have to first do that. And now you have really a wide variety of new tools, which are permissionless, which are a lot of the knowledge is available to everyone to participate. And you have this new like substance matter that you can build on. And that's really exciting. I mean, the PFPs that have been gone around, whether it's like CryptoPunks or whether it's like, doodles or whatever of these, these are new objects that are being built on a new type of substrate for coordination and cooperation. And that to me is like absolutely fascinating, because it's different and it's new and it's weird. But I do think that it's just going to open up doors, especially for, the community managers and communities that have a wide variety of imagination. They'll be able to really express a lot of that imagination in these new types of structures.
Yeah, totally. And I want to know, so what do you see in the ability to co-create as a whole?
Well, I think it goes back to, finding meaning together and being able to express that. When a group of people, get together, you have a certain amount of shared beliefs. You have usually a shared purpose. And I see these tools as another thing that you can use to express yourself. If in the real world, you might have gotten together, you might have written something together, a manifesto or signs that say, we believe this is like the things that we believe. These are the rules of the house, for example. These are our agreements, the list of things that we're going to build. All these smart contracts are our way to do that, but online. They're a way to broadcast to the world how a community works, what values they have in place, and what they're trying to achieve.
So can Web3 survive without blockchain? I had someone say yes, there are other tools. What do you think?
Well, I think Web3 and blockchain are like a bit of like, as John mentioned, scissor labels. Like they mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. When I think about blockchains, I think about like hard technology like Ethereum, Bitcoin, and other types of online ledgers, so trustless ledgers. And when I think about Web3, I actually think about simply a next iteration of the internet. And I think it's a good marketing term, which is pushing us to say, what does the world look like when we think about an open and permissionless internet? When we think about the next iteration, if today's iteration is dominated by major platforms like Google and Facebook, what does it look like to go cozy, to have your own individual space online, which is not controlled by another platform, and there's not surveillance of that specific space? So more freedom in terms of, freedom, I think maybe not the right word, but at least a lot more agency and hopefully privacy that comes with it. I don't think there's anything as saying there is like Web3 without blockchain. I think the Web3 movement has come out of the blockchain technology because of new things that you can do. And we can't really turn the clock and say blockchains don't exist. Hypothetically, yeah, you could have an open environment for it. I just think that there is definitely a next generation internet, regardless of whether you're using blockchain or not. There's a different mindset and there's a different value system. But I do think that it would be very hard and potentially impossible to have some of the agency and autonomy in this next iteration without blockchain technologies.
Yeah, well said. Makes a lot of sense. I really like your perspective, because I was really struggling with that, but it's nice how you explained it. I think it helped me process it better. And also collaboration and efficient interactions within any kind of collective are based on different levels of meaning making and care. What distinctions would you draw between, let's say, a group chat and a shared belief and understanding to perform as a DAO?
I always think about a group chat as like people sitting around a family room, chatting, maybe sitting on the floor, maybe at a picnic in a park, and they're having a conversation. And a group chat allows you to take that conversation anywhere. So you can kind of like pick up and walk away, and you still have this kind of like space for a conversation or discussion. That space is potentially much more exploratory. Usually what I see with these new generations of communities is that there's more directionality and purpose and intention to them. So they have momentum towards a specific set of ideals or goals. I always think about these, while a group chat supports pure connection, right? The purpose of a group chat is connection. The purpose of a DAO may be specifically connection, but often it's the craft of something that we're doing collectively. Whether that be Kraus House buying an MBA team or creator cabins creating the first like network city. There is directionality, intention, and the intimacy is not necessarily based on just an exchange of stories, but the intimacy in a DAO is through a shared effort to be able to achieve something or reconstruct something. And that often is paired with certain financial requirements. I don't think, when I think about human fulfillment, I think you need both. I think you need like intimate connection, space for reflection and mutual support. I also think that, at least from my side, we do want to do something. We like to craft. We like to be artisans. We like to imprint an expression of ourselves onto the world. And I see DAOs as a much more permissionless vehicle to participate that as a collective effort, not just as an individual effort.
Right. So with coordination and contribution being the key elements of DAOs, what do you see in the way Web3 communities operate currently? How have you observed any healthy or unhealthy patterns? Because I mean, everything you said sounds amazing. Sometimes I wonder if, at least what I have observed personally, is the fact that there are great ideas, values are aligned and all of that, but perhaps things don't get executed because everybody has something to say and you want to be considerate to everyone's voice within a DAO.
There are certainly things that are valuable, right? Like we have collective action that is, we have a scale of coordination, which I believe was virtually impossible previously. Right now, you can launch a token, find 10,000 people from around the world, and they all get together for a shared purpose. It'd be very difficult to get 10,000 phone numbers and be able to do any initiative that you'd like. And yet we can quite do that with tokens today and by forming a DAO and executing. I think, though, that within that coordination, that's neutral. You can coordinate for good and you can coordinate for bad. And you can coordinate for good and still do things in not such a good way. I like to think about two different models. So like extractive models of value to the community and value creation models. So in the extractive model, you can get 10,000 people together, and then you can try to get money out of them. I think there are a non-trivial groups today, which are either like Ponzi schemes or gambling environments, or even like sales to the community where the only purpose of the organizing group is to actually get more money out of the people who are participating in the community. This is not special to the digital environment, though. It's very important to note that people have been extracting value from communities forever. There's always been actors that have tried to sell you more stuff, multi-level marketing schemes that have pyramid schemes that have occurred before, Ponzi schemes that have occurred in, there's 1,000 different environments that have been done. So I don't think any of the games are new or bad. I think it's the same patterns which are playing out in the digital environment, potentially at a larger scale. Technology allows you to do more stuff and allows you to do it more efficiently and more effectively and more in a way that's highly targeted. And I think what we're going to see is we're going to see the same type of things that we've always seen, whether it's in a neighborhood, in a market, at a nation, at a global level. And we're going to see that online for both good and bad. We're going to see some miracles happen in terms of coordination and solving incredible problems that we might have thought were impossible to solve, and we'll see that happen. but we'll also see a lot of exploitation and extractive behaviors from certain agents in the system who just want to, take advantage of the community that they're able to coordinate.
I definitely have already started seeing the miracles happening. And we're always wondering, how niche do you think DAOs are? And what does the future look like for DAOs? Do they need to be adopted globally for it to become sustainable in the long run? And like, what are some of the obstacles?
I think DAOs as they are today are a natural evolution to organizations. So we have enterprises, we have like startups from Silicon Valley. We've had communities forever. They've always existed. Humans love community building. And I think we're seeing that expressed online. However, I do think DAOs are very new. They're barely a couple of years old. I think there's a lot to learn from communities which are much more mature, even online. And there's still going to be a lot to learn as the technology kind of continues to evolve. I think DAOs as they are today are probably not going to be the same organizations which are going to exist in a couple of years from now. They're probably going to look very different. They'll probably integrate a lot of stuff that we've already learned and discovered from other online community building and other enterprise building and other organization design work. I do hope, though, that as they grow and mature, I do expect them to carve out a specific group of a specific space, and they'll coexist alongside old institutions. They'll coexist alongside governments and alongside, these large organizations like Toyota or Ford or Disney. It's not really a replacement process. It's just going to be like a type of coexistence and expansion of ways that people coordinate and create value.
Yeah, that sounds incredibly right. I can see that happening, and it would be incredible for Disney to have some sort of a DAO and even use social tokens, and that would be awesome. Rafa, thank you so much. This was really insightful, very meaningful conversation with you.
Thank you so much for having me. And if anybody is listening and interested to chat, definitely just join on Twitter, reply. You can find me at Rafa the Builder, or just take a look at my website and send me an email. Thank you so much for having me, and really excited to see where this all goes.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rafa. And thank you all for being a part of today's forum. If you want to get more involved in our community, make sure to follow us on our social platforms. Twitter is NEWFORUM_NCO, and we're NEWFORUM.io on NewLife.io. You can also join our Discord community to connect with our guests. You find the link in the description as well as Rafa's link. And if you want to learn more about the New Foundation ecosystem, go to the newcoin.org. And please take a moment, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And we will see you in the next episode. Thank you.